Well, last week, Governor Whitmer signed into law House Bill 4141. This is the one that bans smartphone use in public schools during instructional time. This was authored in part by State Rep Mark Tisdale. We'll talk to him uh, as it was being passed in the House, and again, it eventually went to the governor for her signature. This policy reflects growing concerns that smartphones are getting in the way of students being able to learn. It's shortening attention spans and hurting how they're doing in school. Joining us right now to talk more about this, he's written about the bill, and we'll be talking more about it with the senior director of policy at the American Legislative Exchange Council, Jake uh, Morabito, and he's on the line with us right now. Jake, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate you joining us. This new law here in Michigan really kind of aligns with your policy, uh, your model policy limiting student use of cell phones in K through classrooms. Talk a little bit more about that, if you would.
Absolutely. So this Michigan's approach is actually a great example of how to do this policy right. Like you mentioned in the intro, several states actually, at least 38 states in the past 3 years, have either created new laws or new executive orders at the state level dictating whether or not smartphones and personal electronic devices should be allowed by students to use in school. Now, Michigan's approach, like you mentioned, it kind of sets a floor where each school division or school district has to create a policy that prohibits device use during instructional time, so during the class time. However, it does give districts and parents and communities more flexibility if they want to go beyond that and do a complete and total bell-to-bell style ban, as they call it, where it's entirely banned throughout the day. Or if there do want to be exceptions where students can contact their parents during lunch or during passing periods, it gives them that optionality as well, and is not a one-size-fits-all mandate.
I guess, Jake, what I kind of wonder about is, why this had to be a law in the first place. In other words, when I was a kid granted, we're going way, way back several years, but, when I was in school, well before cell phones were a thing, if you had something that you were taking out and playing with during class that was distracting, the teacher would take it, put it on her desk, and, tell you can have it back at the end of the day. Why not just do that with cell phones?
No, I feel the same way. I'm probably not too far behind you. I graduated high school in around 2011. So the smartphones were a thing. They weren't as pervasive as they are now. So, I remember just as you do, where if you took out an electronic device or a video game system or a phone or a music player, the teacher would confiscate it and you'd get it back at the end of the day. My understanding is the issue has just become so pervasive, and there's just every student has a supercomputer in their pocket and access to YouTube and social media at all hours, and it really has become a drag on especially the educators who become the phone police, essentially, and it detracts from learning outcomes in the class. So, and this doesn't, importantly, the approach in Michigan doesn't necessarily limit educational techs. A lot of schools have what they call a one-to-one device policy, where the school issues every child a tablet or a laptop or a Chromebook. So there's really no need for students to use their personal device. So that's what it's trying to get at, is just teach kids to be responsible with their technology, stow it in their bag to the end of the day, or if the school wants to implement a locker or a yonder pouch system, they're welcome to do that. But just keep personal devices away, focus on school, and then they can get it back at the end of the day, essentially.
And the research really bears this out that kids' attention spans are getting shorter due to these devices, and it's affecting their learning, isn't it?
That's what they're finding. However, I will say, we're just a few years into these policies, so the data is not complete. But there was an early report coming out from the National Bureau of Economic Research that did find that a couple years into this program, they did see some marginal improvement in test scores. And then there's just you hear a lot of anecdotal stories from educators or parents or the students even, that the students are actually okay with this policy. There might be some gripes toward the beginning that they can't have their device, but they're largely okay with it. It's surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, it's often the parents that have an issue where they're used to that unfettered 24/7 access to their child. So I think this is another way the school kind of needs to build that trust with the parents, as far as if they're not going to allow students to contact their parents during the school day, they need to have the infrastructure in place that if there's an emergency, or even if it's not an emergency and Sally forgot her lunch, there needs to be a process for relaying that information back and forth.
Yeah, well, like I said, back before there were cell phones, there were ways to do that. Sally's mom calls the office, and somebody brings a note to her or brings her lunch to her, and we lived through life without cell phones before, right?
Absolutely.
This law here in Michigan fits into kind of a broader national movement, doesn't it?
It does. So like I mentioned, there's been over three-quarters of the states have actually passed laws on this specifically, but you've also been seeing a lot of states look at kids' online safety as well when it comes to things like social media and app stores, and whether or not there should be age verification. I know lots of different bills have, or states have actually enacted new laws. So Texas and Utah in particular passed, and Florida passed legislation that would either limit students' access to social media, and a lot of those have been challenged in the courts on First Amendment grounds. But this is an active issue for state legislators. A big part of the issue too is that parents and also the teachers as well need to take this issue seriously. There's a lot of threats facing children, whether it's cyberbullying or sextortion scandals, but also just our children overusing their devices, not using them in a healthy way, and that's not only impacting education but also just their child development. So I feel like, as a more limited government-minded person, that really starts in the home, and parents need to set a positive example and teach their children when it's appropriate to use their devices, when you need to focus at home, maybe read a book or go outside or something like that. So it needs to be a balance, not a complete ban, but there's a time and a place for all these things.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and by making this a state law and other states making it state law, it really normalizes that, hey, we don't take our cell phones out at school. We do keep them in our locker, in our backpack. You're not to take it out. It's not just on a classroom by classroom basis, right?
Absolutely. So that's the thing. It sets some sort of uniform standard across the state of Michigan, but also it does give that those schools, if they feel like it's necessary to go beyond and create a stricter policy, they're more than welcome to do that. But that doesn't handcuff. Maybe if you have maybe a closer knit community, or kind of in a rural area, and maybe this isn't even an issue. Maybe the smartphone issue isn't a problem in that community. They don't have to be forced to implement this, but it could really make a difference in maybe some other communities that are facing. Sometimes when there's pervasive personal smartphone use, there can be behavioral issues throughout the school day, or it can kind of feed into some other negative conduct. And then teachers can stay focused on the instruction, and students hopefully their test scores will rise, and it'll just be better outcomes all around.
All right. Interesting. If people want to read your article, by the way, that you wrote for the American Legislative Exchange Council, where can they find that online?
Absolutely. So you can find our work at alec.org, ALEC.org.
All right, Jake, appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.